All right, gang, and welcome back to Procreate. So this is going to be our second lesson on brush adjustment. Now, it is not possible to go through every single panel of the brush adjustment in a way that leads you to understand brush adjustment until you make them. So what we're going to do here is we're going to cover, this is the second of two, we're going to cover the shading. Now, we already covered some of the adjustments like spacing and such in other videos, and you see that you have common themes, like when you do a stamp brush, you might use, say, spacing, and you might use the stamp preview. Whereas when you make a shader, which is what we're going to make here, you'll really be using a lot of the Apple Pencil functions in that menu. So let's go ahead and create a new brush. Now, we're going to add a new brush. We're going to create a shape from the library. And when I do shaders, I like to use kind of a square shade. So we're going to go ahead, and the shape source is literally going to be called shade. And then we're going to swap the grain from the Pro library. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to use a soft wax texture. Okay, now let's go ahead and title our brush. We're going to call this Shader 1. And done. So you guys already know how to do this. You guys are pros at this. So let's go ahead and work left to right. Spacing, I'm going to go ahead and turn spacing down. And I don't want anything else really here. The stroke taper for a shader, I don't really want. Let's go ahead and take a look at the shape behavior. Now, I don't want to scatter it. You see kind of how this changes the entire game there? I don't want to scatter it, and I really don't want it to rotate around for the grain. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it right about where it is, give or take 0. The shape properties, I'm not really worried about. I don't really want a randomized shape. I want to know that I'm putting shade where I'm putting it. Let's go ahead and jump over to the grain. Now the grain behavior, it's kind of a round grain. So what you're going to want is you're going to want very little movement in this grain. So I'm going to go ahead and go grain movement almost next to nothing. Now what is that going to do? What that does is it says don't roll it, just stretch it. So if this thing runs from one end to the other, it will take that round image and it will stretch it across. Now, scale. We're going to go ahead and we're going to scale this up just a little bit. I want a little bit of dynamics in it. You see how I've got these dark pieces? If I scale it up until there's nothing, that's not going to make for a good brush. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scale it this way. I don't want the grain to rotate. It really isn't important to me in this particular application. Now, I always turn filtering off when I go ahead and do this. Now, what is filtering, folks? Filtering refines the grain. Now, I want it to be granular. I want it to be a little bit, let's say, vague. So let's go ahead and do this. I want to show you how this works. I've got black. I've got my opacity down. Let's go ahead now and put a little bit of grain down here, a little bit of shade. And you'll see how at a very high level, let's go ahead and crank this down even further, you get this really firm line right here. Okay, now let's go ahead and unfilter it. So now I'm going to put this side by side. You see how it's a lot less saturated. So now when we do this part, come back over here, go to the dynamics. I'm going to keep it on normal. And now I'm going to work with the Apple Pencil. For shaders, for things that are pressure sensitive, this is going to be one of your most important panels. When I press harder with the pencil, I want it to affect opacity because when I press harder, I want it to be more sensitive. Now, size, when I press harder, I want more size. And softness, when I press harder, I want it to be a little softer. Now, let's check out how this is working for me. Oh, that's really nice. Let's go ahead and press hard. There we go. All right, now we're getting somewhere. That's a nice shader, starting to turn out real nice. All right, now let's go ahead and tilt. This is one of my favorite things to do. The way that I draw, because I'm a traditional artist that became a digital artist, I like to crank the size up and I like to crank the opacity up when I angle this pencil. So watch what happens with the size. We'll do one at a time. Watch my cursor here now. I'm holding it 90 degrees. You'll see what my cursor is doing. But now I'm going to go ahead and turn it. You see now my pencil is almost laying directly on the iPad. Look at how big that is. That's going to allow me to really work this thing through. And now as I move my pencil back toward 90 degrees, I'm back to a regular shader. That's the trick on the Apple Pencil tilt, folks. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my size up, and I'm going to go ahead and turn my opacity up, because as you tilt the pen, you're not going to be able to get as much. So that is the difference. Look at that. That is running on the side of this Apple Pencil. And now as I move my cursor, watch what happens. I move my pen back. Now I'm back to opaque, and I move it to the side, and I'm back to what I would consider a traditional charcoal. All right. Now, in terms of properties, the generic brush behavior, smudge that all the way up. Size limits, we're going all the way up to 100%, and I think we're in pretty good shape there as it relates to a shader. All right, folks, hope you learned a little bit of something. I've included the shader as a download so you can see exactly what I did. And hopefully you've learned a little bit about the brush adjustment panels, being what filtered versus unfiltered means when it comes to grain, and some of the adjustment pads for the pencil. All right, folks, we'll see you in the next one. Have a good time.